Now, with the Clone Wars series that initially started in 2008 about to come to an end once again, albeit a proper ending this time, not the rather abrupt cancellation it saw when Disney bought Lucasfilm several years back now. Anyway, with the Clone Wars series again about to end with the 4-part Siege of Mandalore story arc, I thought it was a good time to take a fun look back at how the Clone Wars used to end. Because, as a lot of you know, there was once another Clone Wars series altogether, and for some it is considered the superior Clone Wars, though we'll leave that discussion for another time. All I'll say in regards to that now is it was something I really enjoyed back in the day, and it's certainly still worth watching today, especially if you're a big fan of the prequels or even the current Clone Wars. And of course what I'm referring to is the 2003 Clone Wars micro-series, which is also referred to as the Tarkovsky Clone Wars, named after the show's creator, writer, executive producer, and so on. And this earlier version of the show was done in hand-drawn 2D animation, and lasted 3 seasons and was broken up into 2 volumes. The first of which consisting of 20 episodes that were almost all roughly 3 minutes in length, while the second volume consisted of 5 roughly 10-minute episodes that had a tighter overall narrative than the first volume, and told a story that led right up to the start of Revenge of the Sith. And what's even more interesting about that, perhaps, is that the second volume actually came out before that movie did, by a couple months in fact. And I can tell you firsthand, it was very cool to be sitting in the theater reading the opening crawl of Revenge of the Sith for the very first time, where it says General Grievous had kidnapped Palpatine and was now attempting to escape, and having seen that very thing happen in an animated show a couple months before that, and then to open up with this massive Battle of Coruscant, which we also saw in that show. In fact, not to get too far off topic, I think modern-day Lucasfilm under Disney could learn a thing or two from the way things were done back then, that not everything had to be a major secret and saved for the movies. Everything leading up to The Rise of Skywalker, for example, all the books, comics, and so on, turned out to be mostly irrelevant to the movie. And say what you will about The Rise of Skywalker itself, good or bad, but it still would have been cool to maybe get a short, stylistic animated series. It didn't have to be a major or expensive production that perhaps showed Kylo's hunt for the Wayfinder device, and maybe Rey's training under Leia a little bit. You know, where they could have used Leia's voice actor from Resistance to give us some new lines. Not just try to fit leftover lines from The Force Awakens into The Rise of Skywalker, not that I don't appreciate the effort to include Carrie Fisher in the final film of the saga. They could have then thrown this little micro-series up on Disney Plus a couple weeks before the film came out, and I think a lot of people and fans would have really appreciated and got into something like that, again, even if the movie itself was not loved by everybody when it came out. But anyway, let's get back to talking about the second volume of the Clone Wars that led right up into the film, and it opens where the previous season or volume left off, which is with General Grievous attacking a group of Jedi. And before going on, let me make it clear that the General Grievous we see in this series is a whole other beast, and I use the word beast for a reason, from the one we see in the newer Clone Wars series, and even from what we see in the movie itself, really. In this older or original Clone Wars series, he is absolutely terrifying. He's portrayed as a killing machine that can go toe-to-toe with multiple Jedi, and not just any Jedi, but masters like Ki-Adi-Mundi, Shaak Ti, and Aayla Secura, and they're no match for him. His introduction in the final episode of Season 2 is like something straight out of a horror movie, as he essentially stalks a group of trapped Jedi, even forcing one Jedi Padawan, who oddly enough looks like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, to freak out and run, only to literally get crushed to death by Grievous. He then dispatches a couple more Jedi, incapacitates others, and is about to strike down Mundi when, as seen in the first episode of the second volume, he's saved by clone troopers who essentially are able to force him to momentarily retreat, but not before he wrecks a couple of them. And this is really the one and only time he looks anything at all like the Grievous we know in the other Clone Wars series, who's always on the run, it seems. In fact, we even get a moment where he mocks the Jedi from having to flee from him. This is then followed up by a scene of the Jedi Council talking about how Grievous seems to be unstoppable, and that many Jedi have already fallen to him and their numbers are thinning out. At which point Obi-Wan suggests maybe they promote Anakin to Jedi Knight, even though he hasn't officially gone through the trials. He's certainly faced plenty of trials because of the war, and they seem to agree the only one he hasn't faced is the Test of Spirit, or facing the mirror, if you will. Nevertheless, it's Yoda who ultimately decides he shall be knighted. After a nice scene then of Anakin and Padme rendezvousing somewhere in an alley on Coruscant, where Anakin expresses his frustration with having to keep their marriage a secret, Anakin is then knighted and sends his Padawan braid to Padme, which brings to a close the first of the 5 episodes of the second volume. After that, we then get a bit of a side adventure with Anakin and Obi-Wan, where Anakin eats some bugs and they blow up a shield generator and allow Republic forces to overrun a separatist complex. And then we get a very cool scene of Dooku training Grievous, where we also learn he likes to keep lightsabers as trophies. This training session gets interrupted by Darth Sidious, who talks about how it's time for the final operation of the war, and he asks Grievous if he's ready for his special mission, which is of course to abduct Palpatine, and I'm pretty sure Grievous doesn't know Sidious and Chancellor Palpatine are one and the same. Anyway, immediately after this, or right before the Battle of Coruscant begins, Chancellor Palpatine is sending Anakin and Obi-Wan off to the planet Nelvan, where Grievous has reportedly been spotted heading multiple times, and where he is supposedly now. And though Windu believes the information to be suspect at best, Palpatine, however, assures them the info is good, and away Obi-Wan and Anakin go. And it's interesting to note that Palpatine sends Anakin away at this point, apparently not wanting him to be near Coruscant during the attack on the planet, likely because he wants him to be there for the eventual rescue, so he can face Dooku. On Nelvan then, our heroes are attacked by a giant Gorax, which Anakin promptly kills despite Obi-Wan trying to warn him not to, because those are just the things Anakin does. Problem is, it was supposed to be part of a native boy's rite of passage ritual, and after this, Anakin and Obi-Wan learn from the local villagers that something plagues these lands, or the Mother as they call it, and champion after champion has been sent out to fix this, but none have returned, and they were choosing a new one when Anakin interfered. There's also apparently the legend of someone called Ghost Hand, which Anakin and his mechanical hand just so happen to fit, and so now he gets to take the place of the champion to go and heal the Mother, and Obi-Wan believes this to possibly be a good trial of the spirit, so he lets him go alone. Meanwhile, back on Coruscant, the sneak attack begins, and I must say that even though this is just a 2D cartoon, essentially, the battle does look really epic. There's tons of action, and you really get a sense of the scale or how massive this thing really is, which we of course know it is. Yoda and Mace Windu also end up the all-stars of this battle, doing all kinds of crazy, impressive Jedi things. Yoda even shows off his inner Star Killer from the Force Unleashed series, and is literally pulling ships out of the sky at one point. And one of my favorite parts is that during the battle, Palpatine is just sitting back, relaxing, and sipping on some tea as he patiently waits to be abducted by Grievous. Shaak Ti and a couple other Jedi soon enough show up in an effort to get him somewhere safe, but that's when Grievous comes crashing through the window, at which point Palpatine basically stands up and tells him off, knowing full well Grievous isn't going to hurt him, since the order is to take him alive, given by himself. Not that, when you really think about it, Grievous would stand much of a chance against Palpatine, but he'd obviously have to blow his cover in order to defend himself. After Grievous absolutely murders some clone troopers and Senate guards, a wild chase across Coruscant begins, which again has this bit of a horror movie type vibe to it, as you watch the Jedi with Palpatine in tow, just running for their lives while they relentlessly are pursued by Grievous. Elsewhere then on Coruscant, Windu and Yoda both realize that this attack doesn't make much sense, and that it's perhaps a distraction. They quickly realize the target is probably Palpatine, and Windu heads off to find and protect the Chancellor. Back on Nelvan now, Anakin journeys to the Mouth of the Mother, as it's called, and inside finds some cave drawings, which animate and tell a little story about Ghost Hand, who was clearly the hero of the people, protecting them from all sorts of dangers, until he lost the one he cared about the most, and became angry and in a sense seems to fall to the dark side, at which point the cave painting shifts and resembles the form of Vader's mask and leaves Anakin quite shaken. Soon after this, Anakin discovers a secret separatist base or lab where the Techno Union seems to be experimenting on the local villagers, turning them into some type of mindless soldiers or something along those lines. We see some schematics of Grievous, so perhaps it's based loosely on that design. Either way, Anakin eventually frees the people, and he uses his mechanical hand to reach in and crush some type of energy crystal, maybe a kyber crystal, that was surrounded by a force field, which powered the base, which then promptly destroys the base, and he loses his mechanical hand in the process. Right after this, Anakin embraces the dark side and goes on a bit of a rampage against the Techno-Union droids, even going so far as to crush the, I guess, life out of one of them, which was really cool to see. Soon enough, Anakin and the men of the village return home, but they are still misshapen and are unsure if they will be accepted in their now monstrous forms, which is something Obi-Wan and Anakin discuss briefly when talking about the vision he had, which Anakin really doesn't seem to want to talk about. Back on Coruscant, the Jedi are continuing to flee from Grievous, again with Palpatine in tow, but eventually he catches up with them, kills 2 of them, and leaves Shaak Ti tied up because, well, likely because originally there was a scene of her dying in Revenge of the Sith that got deleted. Either way, before Grievous can get away with Palpatine, Windu shows up, and though there's no actual confrontation, which could have been very cool to see, before Grievous can get on his ship, Windu reaches out through the Force and crushes his chest plating, after which Grievous starts to immediately cough because, no, unlike in the other Clone Wars series, he doesn't cough the entire time, for, well, no reason really. It then ends with Anakin having a new hand constructed, which he puts a glove on, the one he wears during Revenge of the Sith. Obi-Wan tries to tell Anakin that what he saw during his trial of spirit does not have to come to pass, that when you look inside, sometimes you see things about yourself that you don't like, but these aspects are not set in stone. A person can change. Before they can talk about it any further, Windu sends them an urgent message telling them the Chancellor has been kidnapped, and if you've seen Revenge of the Sith, you know the rest of the story. All in all here, as I said at the top, this is quite good and worthy of watching still today, even though it's not considered canon. This was an amazing and very relevant setup for Revenge of the Sith that, no, wasn't required viewing by any stretch, but it was rewarding nonetheless. And perhaps the biggest shame or loss, or whatever you'd like to call it, was losing this version of Grievous. He's literally scary in this, and the Jedi who face him show genuine fear. Now, I don't hate him in the newer version of the Clone Wars, but he not only lacks the same intimidation factor, he kind of becomes that villain who constantly is saying, "I'll get you next time," as he runs away. In fact, one of my biggest gripes with the new Clone Wars, if not the biggest, is Grievous. Nevertheless, I do still very much love the new Clone Wars series, don't get me wrong, and I'm eager to see if any elements at all from this original ending make it into the new one, not that I expect that to happen. It would be nice if they have the time to maybe show the abduction of Palpatine by Grievous, and have him relentlessly chase the Jedi down across the city to capture him, and then maybe get a battle where Grievous can really shine and take out some Jedi. Again, not expecting it, but it would be cool. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of the original Clone Wars ending, or what you think about the old version of Grievous compared to the newer one. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.